The MCAT Cars Podcast, session number 13. The Cars section of the MCAT gives thousands of pre-meds nightmares every night. Whether you're an ESL student, lack confidence while reading, or are a slow reader like me, Jack Westin and the medical school headquarters are here to help you score higher in every section so you can be confident you're ready to get the MCAT score of your dreams. Now, welcome to the MCAT Cars Podcast. My name is Dr. Ryan Gray, your host here every week, where I'm joined by Jack Westin from jackwestin.com. Hopefully you followed along last week where we dove into a passage from the AAMC from their MCAT 2015 mini ebook, which is available for everybody to see. We broke down that passage, we broke down the questions. So if you haven't listened to that, if you haven't listened to any of the other episodes, I highly encourage you to go back to session 1, learn about who we are, and then start diving into the articles that we break down in session 2 and beyond. That's what we're doing today. We're breaking down a great article from The Atlantic. All right, Jack, back for some more MCAT Cars podcast. I'm excited after last week's awesome breakdown of that AAMC MCAT passage. We have an awesome article here from The Atlantic. What do you have to say about this article?
Last week's passage was pretty brutal. It's one of the harder passages that the exam has ever given out to students to use or to practice with. This one is similar in terms of what they could present, but it's definitely easier and way more interesting than what we were reading before. So this is a fun psychology passage, and it's something that can definitely come up on your exam, which I love. And it happens to be interesting, so it will probably be a lot easier to read. Go ahead.
Define easier. So you said last week's was hard, this week's is easier. In your mind, what determines easy versus hard for a passage?
2 things. Well, actually, I'll take it back. There's 3 things that really make something easy or hard. 1 is your subjective viewpoint on the topic. Okay. Assuming that most pre-meds are not philosophy majors or art history majors, they will probably find passages on philosophy and art harder because they're not interested in it. That's 1. Okay, and this is psychology. Most pre-meds take psychology. They don't mind it. They've taken AP psychology or they're psych majors, right? So they don't mind this. Second of all, the arguments are easier when arguments that are easier are usually just easier to read, right? I mean, like if they're not dense and abstract, then it's easier for you. So if the arguments are not so abstract, which they're not, they're more relatable, they're there are things that we can converse about, then they seem to be easier for students. So the passage we read last week was abstract. It was not something that is relatable to students. It's not something that we normally think about. This, on the other hand, relates to us. It's something that we do think about, right? It's relatable to us. The third thing is the style of the author. So the number of hard vocab words they use, the way the author portrays the material, whether it's direct or indirect, that can make it more challenging. So this could be a psychology article that could be very challenging if the author decides, hey, I don't want to be so clear, I want to be more vague when I describe things, or maybe they want to be more sarcastic. So the prose could really make something a lot more difficult to understand.
Okay. There's a good chance you've hallucinated before. If you've ever felt the buzz of your phone against your thigh, only to realize the sensation was entirely in your head, you've had a sensory perception of something that isn't real. So the author is talking about hallucination right off the bat and claiming that I, the reader, have hallucinated, and then gives an example of the phantom phone buzzing in your pocket, which I think most of us at this point have felt.
Okay.
And that, according to the psychologist Philip Corlett, is what makes a hallucination. So a name here, psychologist Philip Corlett, and they're, I think, helping us define hallucination, a sensory perception of something that isn't real.
Sounds good. Excellent. I think for most students, this is not so hard because it might have happened to them, right? Does this happen to you?
Yeah.
I think it happens to everyone. You can't get away from your phone, right? And yeah, hallucination is rather interesting relative to what we were talking about last week. I mean, what was it? Invisible hand, right? Like, what the heck is invisible hand compared to hallucination? The topic is way more relatable.
Yeah.
Okay.
The invisible hand seems like something from like a Marvel TV show or something.
Yeah.
To many, this definition may seem shockingly broad. So, shockingly broad, they're saying, hey, maybe this definition by Philip Corlett is maybe too broad. The definition may be too broad. It's something that isn't real, sensory perception that isn't real. Hallucinations were long considered the stuff of psychoses or drug trips, not a regular and inconsequential part of life. And so the author's comparing potentially what we used to associate hallucinations with, the psychoses or drug trips, and not this phantom buzzing in your pocket.
Okay.
But Corlett operates on the idea that hallucinations exist within a hierarchy. So bringing up Philip Corlett again and more of his idea about why, yes, hallucinations are just as simple as sensory perceptions of something that isn't real, and saying that maybe there's this hierarchy of stuff from drug trips, potentially the psychoses, to something as benign as a phantom buzz.
Okay.
At the highest level, according to Corlett's collaborator Albert Powers, they would be something like hearing, quote, whole sentences of clearly spoken speech of a being who seems quite real, end quote. So again, highest level in this hierarchy of a hallucination is hearing sentences, that clearly spoken word, from somebody who seems quite real, but isn't.
That's what we normally perceive as hallucination, right?
Yeah.
That's our normal way of looking at it. Great.
Mm-hmm. But moving further down the line, hallucinations can be far more banal. An imagined text message, a phantom raindrop, a new parent's mistaken sense of her child by her bedside. So we have the spoken speech in one top level, and then far below that line is these other examples, the text message, raindrop, etc.
Right. So this is trying to support the idea that the definition that Corlett brings up is actually correct, right? Because it's a hierarchy. So that's how the author is trying to convince us that, hey, look, this is actually hallucination. So we hallucinate all the time, apparently. Okay, go ahead.
This hierarchy perspective represents an ongoing revelation in how widespread and varied hallucinations can be. So if we do take this perspective, that there is this hierarchy, then the author is saying that hallucinations can be very varied, not what we only used to think about as far as just psychoses and drug trips.
Okay.
A survey in the early 1990s found that 10 to 15% of the population of the United States experienced vivid sensory hallucinations at some point in their lives. So the survey, 10 to 15% vivid sensory hallucinations, and we don't know what vivid hallucinations means at this point, but it seems like 1 in 10 to 10 in 100 to 15 in 100. It's pretty big. Okay?
Yep.
And scientists have begun to take seriously the idea that voice hearing and other forms of auditory hallucination can be benign or non-clinical, quote, non-clinical. And so scientists, whoever those people are beginning to think that maybe because there is this hierarchy that we can have benign or non-clinical auditory hallucinations and not just, again, going back to the words that he used in the previous paragraph, the long considered the stuff of psychoses or drug trips, that maybe they're not that bad after all.
Yeah, exactly. So the author is trying to paint this picture that, hey, look, chill out. Hallucinations are a part of life.
Yeah.
Okay.
This newfound ubiquity has come with a host of questions. So this sentence potentially could throw me off. I don't know what ubiquity means. I don't know what that definition means. So I hope that I would keep reading and get a sense of that context.
Right. Okay.
Why is it so common for people to perceive what isn't there? And how does the brain allow this to happen in the first place? So now the question is being set up. Why does this happen? Why do we perceive what isn't there? Why do we hallucinate?
Okay.
To find answers, researchers have turned to the mechanics of how we perceive reality itself. And so now it looks like the author is going to dive into potentially how we perceive reality. How does the brain perceive what is there and what isn't there?
Right. So it seems like we're transitioning into a whole new part of the passage.
Seems like it.
We were talking about hallucinations, how there's a definition for them, how it's a broad definition, everyone hallucinates. Now we're going to be talking about why do we even hallucinate to begin with, right? And yeah, great job. Go ahead.
For Corlett and Powers, both from the Yale School of Medicine, hallucinations have everything to do with expectations. So the same two names from before, now they give us a little bit of context that Yale School of Medicine, and they're saying hallucinations have to do with expectations. In the new paper in Science, they explore how the mysterious experiences fit into a larger speculative idea about how the brain works, and in a sense, what the brain is. So they're introducing a journal, the Journal of Science here. It's in italics, so we know it's a publication, a print of something, a work of something. And they're going to tell us what the brain is. The pair recounts a 2017 study they conducted in which their group tried to induce hallucinations both in people who commonly report hallucinations across the psychotic spectrum and in people who don't normally hallucinate. So they're just telling the author saying, hey, there was this 2017 study and we tried to induce hallucinations with people who have them and people who don't.
Yeah, so this is very important. The MCAT loves to test on experiments. So you better make sure you understand what's happening in the experiment, who the subjects are, what they're testing for, which has been very clearly explained, right? They're testing to see why we hallucinate, and we're now given subjects. So go ahead.
The participants were taught to expect to hear a tone after being shown a flashing light, and then were made to press a button when they thought they heard a tone. So they're setting up the experiment for us. They're expected to hear a tone after a flashing light, and then you press a button when you hear a tone. It's kind of like a hearing test.
Yep.
They were told to hold down the button longer to rate their confidence in what they heard. So again, testing, if you really thought you heard it, hold the button longer. People who regularly hallucinate held the button. That is, they hallucinated significantly longer than those who didn't. So it's interesting. I don't know what this last sentence is saying. Those who regularly hallucinate, those who are already known to hallucinate, are holding the button longer than those who don't. Which means that they're more confident that they're hearing the tone, but they're not telling us if they really are hearing the tone. That's what I'm confused here.
Right. So there was no tone.
Ever?
Right? Ever. Yeah.
Oh.
So all they're doing is they're trying to see whether or not you hallucinate, and the hallucination is based on whether or not you hear the tone, right? And you never actually hear it. You just see the flashes.
Okay.
Right. So let me just this is a really important experiment because they will ask, I'll give you some questions they could ask here, but basically they're setting up this experiment where you have people who hallucinate and people who don't, right? Regardless of who you are. And they ask you, look at these lights. When these lights flash, expect to hear something. When you hear it, go ahead and click on that button, right? And hold the button down as the longer you hear it. There is no sound, right? They just see the flashes. So if you're hallucinating, you actually hear the sounds, right? So when you hallucinate, you click on it, you hold it down. Seems like the people who are hallucinating, the ones that are holding it down more, are the ones that were categorized as hallucinators to begin with, right? That's what it's kind of saying here.
Okay.
And why would the author bring this up? What's the point of this? Why would the author bring up this experiment?
The author is bringing up the experiment, I think, because they are in the previous. Is it the previous one? No. In the beginning part of this paragraph, they talked about everything has to do with expectations.
Right.
And so if you have people who report that they hallucinate, then potentially they're going to expect it already because they have that expectation.
That's it. So it's based on expectations. They're basically suggesting that this experiment proves that it's based on expectations. If you're expecting to hear a sound, you will press it longer. So it's suggesting that people who hallucinate are better at expecting things. They expect things more, right? So hallucination seems to be connected to expectations in some way.
Okay. Corlett and Powers see this experiment as evidence for their perspective on how people understand the world around them. So the author is saying that these two researchers are saying, look, this is proof that it's expectations that's driving how people understand the world around them.
Okay.
By their way of thinking, the brain works by, quote, predictive coding, integrating new information based on the beliefs built on old information. So, predictive coding. So our brain is constantly using old information, trying to integrate new information and predict what our experiences may be, which is what expectations are.
Yeah.
Okay. Quote, when we go about the world, we're not just passively perceiving sensory inputs through our eyes and ears, end quote, Corlett says. Quote, we actually build a model in our minds of what we expect to be present, end quote. So he's just, the researcher Corlett is basically putting one last cherry on top about everything that we're perceiving is built on our expectations.
Yes. So what's the big picture of this paragraph?
The big picture of this paragraph is that we as humans understand the world around us based on our expectations, based on our previous experiences and trying to integrate new experiences.
It's also based on hallucinations, right? We hallucinate because our brain is expecting something to happen. So don't forget the hallucination aspect, right? The whole topic is about hallucination.
Yep.
Great. Okay. So let me go back to that example because that was a great example. They love presenting these kinds of examples for psych passages. One of the questions that they love to ask is, what are one of the weaknesses of the study? Okay. What are one of the weaknesses of the study? And if you know that the study is about hearing, right? Hearing the whatever it is that you expect to hear something. We could suggest that one of the weaknesses could be that it's based only on hearing. Maybe there's a different type of hallucination when you see things, right? When you expect to see things versus when you hear things. So they could test these kinds of ideas when something is weak or when something is strong in an experiment, whether parts of the experiment are missing, right? Maybe there should have been an extra control group, right? So those are the things that they like to test on. So understanding the ins and outs of the experiment is going to be very helpful. A lot of students kind of rush through the experiment because they think, oh, well, I already know the experiment is trying to prove there's expectations. but you got to know what the experiment is saying because they'll actually ask you about those experiments.
Yeah. Okay. So, and experiments, I think it's one of those things when you cover experiments in passages in biochem, whatever, chem phys sections, it's like, oh, experiments. Why are you testing me on experiment theory and philosophy? But it's important and definitely something that the MCAT will test on.
Yeah, medicine is all about research, right? I mean, we are where we are today in medicine because of research. Mm-hmm. So they expect the future of medicine to understand research studies and understand how they relate to society.
Yep.
Right. So yeah, great. Yeah, and the other main idea I would say, I mean, if you had to suggest there was only one main idea, I think that is the big main idea, right? The main idea that hallucinations are from the brain expecting something to happen. But the other one is that hallucinations are on a spectrum. There's a hierarchy. And they brought that up. That seemed to be a very important point, which kind of explains why everyone can hallucinate. Yep, that's it.
All right. Anything else that we need to discuss about this article?
No, I mean, that's really it. I mean, as long as you realize that experiments are very, very important, you're careful with them, because a lot of students are careless when they read an easy passage. This is definitely on the easier side. You can mess up a lot, right? You can make a lot of mistakes if you're not careful.
All right, there you have it. A great article from The Atlantic all about hallucinations. It was an interesting article, interesting breakdown, trying to understand what the author is telling us. And remember, it's what it's all about. What is this author telling us? Not trying to read into anything, not trying to make our own conclusions. That's where I typically go wrong. But what literally is the author telling us in the words and the sentences that he or she is writing? That's our job here in the MCAT Cars section, and that's our job here to teach you how to do that here in the MCAT Cars podcast. If you're looking for some more personalized attention with your MCAT Cars strategy, with your MCAT Cars prep, go check out medicalschoolhq.net/Jack Westin and learn about his MCAT Cars strategy course. By going to that link, it automatically activates a $100 coupon that you can use towards the MCAT Cars strategy course, where you are going to get over 70 hours of instruction to learn to master the critical thinking skills necessary to get the car score of your dreams. You'll get personalized attention. You'll gain confidence with clear, proven methods from Jack Westin, the expert in the cars section. Go to medicalschoolhq.net/Jack Westin to activate that $100 off coupon, or text the word CARS coupon to 44222 and we'll send you that link as well. Hope you have a great week. We'll see you next time here on the MCAT Cars podcast. When you use the links provided in this podcast, you're helping to support MedEd Media and the podcasts that we produce. Not only do you get a discount, but we earn a small commission as well. Thank you for your support.